Hey guys, this is the first edition of the Marv and Basketball Podcast Show, and I've got an amazing guest with myself, someone who I've spoken to and known for many years now. It's Mr. S&C coach Jacob Ross, who has been coaching and training Luol Deng for over 12 years plus, works for the South Sudan national basketball team, and is actually, I see this, the VP at Matter Pro. I saw that earlier. So we're going to talk about that as well. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it, bro. How you been?
I'm doing good. I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. It's good to catch up too. We don't get to talk enough.
We don't. And after this now, I'm making it a thing where we are going to have at least either every 2 week or monthly catch up, because I like to pick your brain on certain things. And that's why I wanted to talk to you. A lot of people thinking like, why am I having on a basketball show talking to an S&C coach? Well, actually, you're more than just that. You are somebody that conditions athletes in their prime and getting them to the point of being the best worked out athletes they can be. Now, we could talk about how you got Luol Deng to where he got to, but what I want to speak to you about now is the differences between an 80s and 90s athlete to an athlete now. Go.
Well, I will do my best. I mean, I was born in the 80s, right? So I can't speak to it too much, but I would say in general, if we're speaking about basketball specifically, basketball in the 80s and 90s, like strength conditioning wasn't necessarily something that was common. It wasn't necessarily something that everyone felt was just, compulsory to do. Whereas it's now, like now, if you were to get drafted by a team and you're not in the weight room, they're going to be like, what's wrong with you? Like, exactly. No, here's your coach. You're in the weight room. This is your time. It's part of a lot of times it's written into your contract now. You have to get X amount of days in the off season in the weight room. In the 80s and 90s, that was not the case. I mean, Jordan gets a lot of credit with like pioneering that current phase of like really taking care of your body, like working with Tim Grover. And I don't know, I don't know enough guys in the league to know, like, was he for sure the first, but he popularized it regardless. Yeah. And he was the first guy, it seems like, to like really, really take their training, seriously. And, compared to now, like I said, where now if you make it to, college and you have it lifted, they're going to be like, what's wrong with you? Like, it's a completely different mindset, I would say now. You still get a lot of younger kids, I think, in today's world who don't necessarily strength condition a lot. But if you play anything at a higher level, you're doing it for sure.
100%. And with yourself, obviously seeing that change, because you came from a football background, didn't you, as well?
Yeah, well, I grew up in a little town in Texas. And so, like, of course, like American football is obviously like the sport in Texas.
It's the sport.
But I played.
My grandfather's from Gillette, Texas, actually.
Oh, really?
Yes, I bet you didn't know that. See, I'm actually a Texas. I'm from, like, my family's from Texas. So Gillette, Texas is a very, very small town. But I know he used to tell me before he passed away, like, that football is everything in Texas.
Oh my gosh. I mean, my town had like 3,000 people in it, but we'd have like 1,000 or more at our football games on Friday.
See, like, if you look at that as an Instagram number, that's just ridiculous. Like, if you got 3,000 people, you're only going to have maybe 10 people turn up. But how you can have 3,000, 1,000 people turn up? That is crazy.
Yeah, and we weren't even very good. We were like 5-5. Like, we were terrible. But what's interesting is I played basketball in high school. I was best at football, American football for sure. That was my sport in terms of talent. But I played basketball and I ran track as well. But basketball is always my favorite sport. So like I grew up watching, my generation, like yours, like we grew up watching like the And1 mixtape tour. Yeah. Vince Carter jumping over that guy in the Olympics to dunk. Yeah. Like, to me, is like the golden era of like basketball, because I just, all those the media was coming out, Slam magazine, like all that stuff. And like, exactly. I had all that, like this little kid in Texas, like I still found a way to like consume that media without the internet at this point.
Yeah, exactly. That was
internet, yeah. So I loved basketball, and on my team, we had a really good team. One year we went like 31 games. We won 31 games before we lost. It was like right before like the state championship. Jeez. And so I was happy to play on that team with those guys. It was a lot of fun. And anyway, so you fast forward till now where I end up working with Luol for all those years, and I work with the South Sudan men's national team, and like basketball is like kind of a lot of what I'm involved in today. And it's just kind of cool, in my opinion, to see like how God kind of guided my journey to where a place where I'm doing something that I really, really passionate about. And, I train a lot of NFL players and I do love American football, but I still like basketball just a little bit more.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean. But in looking at that as well, you said training Luol for 12 years. Obviously, during that time, there's been so many changes in the industry and fitness and ways in which things that like knees over toes and people saying you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do all the things that we were taught. So during that time when you were actually training Luol, you were also having to learn on the job like a doctor would. So obviously everyone's bodies are different as well. I always speak to you about my tight hip flexors constantly all the time, every time I see you, and they're still tight as hell, which is ridiculous, but I do everything I can. But the good thing with someone working with that one person, that one individual, as he was getting older, you could always see and know what to do to change, to improve. Was there any challenges you faced as he was getting older where you were saying, all right, we've lost this now, so we need to work on this? Did that happen at all?
So, it's really interesting. It's a strange phenomenon that occurred with Lou. So when I first met Lou, I would actually say he was in worse shape than when he retired.
Wow.
When I first met Lou, every workout he would ice both knees, sometimes shoulders, sometimes ankles. Like I was so good at like doing like the, getting on the ice out, spinning it. Like I was so good at that because he always had the ice. And when I first met him too, he was coming off that season where he had broken his leg. And so he had played a whole, however many months basically on one leg essentially, because it hurt to use the other leg. And so the first offseason I was with him, like it was very rehab focused on getting that one leg that he broke back up to par. And then also, just trying to even out his body. His hips were crazy tight. And, it's funny, like a lot of that's just being South Sudanese, right? Like his legs are incredibly long. His torso is very short.
See, that's another thing people don't talk about, people's biological and genetic makeup. That's a whole nother thing. Yeah, keep going.
Well, you said it. Every body's different, dude. Right? Like,
exactly.
like physically. And actually, it's funny. There's this video I posted with Joe Luol's brother on Instagram.
I saw that
with us sitting down,
it's unreal. Like you're like, how can this be? It's like, no, that's the tribe. That's his tribe. That's what they do. It's a small top, big low end on the bottom. It's just crazy.
Yeah, and people can't believe it. It's funny. A Joe sent me a message this morning. He's like, it's been seen like 800,000 times. Like views,
but
people can't believe
they don't understand why you would have a bigger torso. But I'm saying, but that's our bodies are so different.
And so from an SNC standpoint, that's a really challenging thing for me to coach because his squat mechanics are different, his deadlift mechanics. I mean, anything that's what I would say is like a normal SNC movement for an athlete is going to be a little bit changed. I don't want to say necessarily complicated, just different than someone else. And so a lot of my early work with Luol was focused on that and just having him in shape because back then in the NBA, they would play 4 games in 5 nights.
Yeah,
that's illegal now. Like,
that is crazy now. I know they regressed it and they were still talking about regressing it again. Do you think it should be regressed more, or do you feel like right now is the right place?
I mean, I think if you reduce basketball down at a professional level to really what it is about, which is revenue, then yes, you should, because you give the players optimal time to recover and be on the court and play their best. From the like hardcore like sports, like no, screw that, like make a play, because like I said, like Luol, another reason why we focused on conditioning is because he was always guarding the best player. Yeah, so it was Kobe in his prime, it was Carmelo in his prime, it was
LeBron in his prime,
in his prime.
Everybody,
that was his job. And he led the league in minutes for a few years. I mean, he was averaging 42, 43 minutes. So my job was really like to just have him in such good shape that he could withstand that defensive assignment, playing those minutes, and then also, having enough energy to score. I mean, he was an All-Star twice. I mean, that's scoring. They don't give out All-Stars for defense very often.
Exactly.
And so a lot of my job with him was focusing on that, right? And then I would say that like, maybe year or 2 or 3, the further we got into it, he stopped icing his knees. He's like, my knees feel better, right? And we kept going, and his hips started getting more mobile. And, you kind of go with like, I'd say his training got to a better place. At the same time, like as he got older, he played less. Yeah. And so like those two things kind of intersected to a place where he was actually really, really healthy when he retired. Like to this day, I know for a fact he could step on an NBA game. He could play 30 minutes and it would be no problem for him physically. Now,
Wow.
he hasn't played obviously in a couple of years, so like the speed of the game and all that's separate. But in terms
That's
of
separate.
physically speaking, he
He
could
could
step
do
on
it.
there and play
He
a
could
good
play.
30 minutes, no problem. And so it's kind of weird, I think you get smarter as you get older, and I think you figure out better ways to train and to be kind of more efficient and optimal with your time. And Lou was so dedicated too. It's the thing that people really undervalue because they just don't know. We would lift after games a lot.
Yeah, I remember.
There was never a day where we weren't working on his body. Didn't exist.
Yeah.
It did not exist. I mean, the guy was so consistent with his training. It was incredible. And that work ethic, I think, and that consistency, and it doesn't mean that every day was 100% in terms of intensity. It just means we were doing
You have to
something
do
that helped
something.
every day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
in regards to that as well, and players like him, someone like LeBron, who always comes up when it comes to his physical attributes, how he plays and how he conditions his body, the $1 million he spends a year on his body. Like, in what respects do you say he spends $1 million to what do you think he does and what is natural? Because I always say everyone has a natural gift in something. You know the movie Unbreakable with with like, I always think to myself, I do think there's people that are like that. When I watch American football, I'm like, I'm telling you, if I got hit like that, it's over. It's a wrap. Like it's finished. Like even if I was training, it would be a wrap. So someone like LeBron, do you think that? Because to me, it doesn't look right. I'm like, it just looks unreal. I don't know how he's doing it. Like, do you feel that he is doing that same type of training every single day and recovery too?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that from what I know to be true about LeBron, and like I don't know him personally, but just being in the industry and talking to people, the guy works on his body every day. That's true. He got roasted a few years ago for a squat video, right? He was barbell squatting and it looked just terrible.
I saw that video.
Yeah, he was happy about it, but people were going in like, this is terrible for him and all this other stuff. And it's like, I don't know, like he's not a power lifter. Like,
yeah, that's not his job.
Like if he's getting stronger and it's just like a half rep, then and that's fine. Now you can argue all day about should he be doing it and all this other stuff. That doesn't matter. But the point is like I do think the guy not only spends a lot of money on his body, but is consistent with it in all these different modalities. I think that's part of it. But I agree with your point about like the unbreakable thing. So like one of the guys I trained in the NFL was Matt Forte. And there was like a 5-year span when he played for the Bears. He's running back, where he actually led the league in yards from scrimmage in combined rushing and receiving. So the rushing side was Adrian Peterson because that's all he did was run, right?
Yeah.
Matt was a receiving back as well. And he actually had more yards combined than Adrian Peterson had, which is kind of crazy.
That's not good for him in terms of trying to negotiate a contract, but like,
right. So those 4 years I trained him, he missed one game. And so by definition of getting that many touches, he was getting hit, right? You don't just go out of bounds every time.
Like every time you get the ball, you're gonna get hit.
You're getting hit.
Getting a touchdown.
So he was getting hit as much, if not more, than anybody else in the league, and he missed one game during that time. Now, don't get me wrong, Matt was very dedicated and he was super consistent, and he's a great human being. But like, I don't know that necessarily translated to him not getting hurt. And like Adrian Peterson, right? He tore his ACL, came back, set the NFL record in rushing.
Yeah.
So, like the next year, there was no gap year. Like, no, the next year he set the NFL record in rushing. And like, I think there's a genetic component to like just people being more durable. Because I've trained a lot of guys who are super consistent and all that, and they just keep getting nicks and niggles,
the nicks and cracks. Exactly. And that is so weird you said that, especially with the ACL, because I say most people years ago, like we were talking 80s and 90s, an ACL tear, it's over. Like if you were going to tear your ACL before you were getting drafted, you are no longer a lotto pick. Whereas now you can still be a lotto pick, where it's crazy to think that. Like, it's like, wait a second, you're still going to pick him even though he tore his ACL. It's like, well, no, we can rehab him. He's young. We'll get him back. And I'm like, well, we wouldn't have done that in the 80s and 90s. So do you think that's a lot to do as well with what you do, the changes in science, the changes in how we recover and the drugs as well? Let's be honest. We've got different supplementation that we take that's legal that can help you recover. Now, is there a particular supplementation that you've seen or heard of now that actually does help you recover in a legal sense?
I don't think so. My rule on supplements, at least in the States, is like everything that really works is really illegal, right? Because if it really works, if it really works,
I love
by
that.
definition, you can really hurt yourself if you abuse it or you're not sure what to do with it.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of things that when you combine them together with other things can help. But I've trained so many pro athletes who've done everything under the sun. Like they've done the go to Germany and do like the Kobe treatment. They do the PRP stuff. They do all these different things. And some guys are like, oh, that really helped. And some guys they do the same thing, like, oh, it didn't help at all. Yeah. I think so much of it is like customized. And like my rule about supplementation or kind of treatments like that is, is it legal for your sport? Is it safe? Like, is there any sort of risk to your health? If those two things are okay, then I'm like, okay, then do what you feel, because I think there's a really big mental component to it.
Yeah.
And, again, during my time, like when I was starting to train all these pro guys, this is when it was actually the early age of what I'd say the modern recovery device movement. So Luol had one of the first massage guns ever. Wow. This thing was made out of surgical steel, and it had a piston on the end of it, like this big around, a steel piston, and just wow. It was and it had a cord like a power drill, right? Like you compare that to hyper-ice machines now, right? The side's black, super cool, rubber tips. This was on the early end, and we had these guys come into our gym during the NFL offseason because we had a lot of NFL guys. This one guy set up this whole row of recovery equipment. There was this you remember those balls when you were a kid that you touched, the lightning would come up?
Yeah.
He had a big one of these, and he had guys hold these metal wands, and lightning was in the air, and he's like, this helps recover you, and
oh wow,
lasers
anything
on your
that
knees,
looks cool, that's fake, that looks like it could work. But again, mental recovery, like you said, it's mental. If it's expensive enough, you believe it's real.
Right. And so, it's hard to say, because my thing is if any of that stuff really worked consistently for everyone, then it would be a medical treatment, right? It wouldn't be a supplement.
Exactly.
We'd be doing it in hospitals. We'd be doing it all over the world. And none of that stuff has ever gotten an efficacy to the point where it's taken off like that. Yeah. So I think it's kind of people are asking a lot about creatine. Should I take creatine? I'm trying to gain weight. Yeah. Well, creatine is probably the most studied supplement outside of just, protein. Yeah. And there's a lot of research that says it can help you be, a little bit stronger. But my thing is well, unless your diet is perfect and your sleep is perfect, and you're probably not going to notice actually the performance difference. Yeah. But if you, in your head, if you feel like it's helping you, then take it. It's not hurting you, so go for it.
That's exactly what I've said to clients in the past, and now I'm like, you could take all these things that you want, but if you're going to Five Guys straight after, it's not really going to help you. But at the same time, certain body types and certain people, as you know, for some reason, it's helping them. It's not, if anything, they're being enhanced. And that's why I say that it's that whole genetic thing where there's people that you work with where, why are they seeing these unbelievable results in mass and the other person's doing the same thing and they're not? And that's why I always say to people, when you see these 6-week body transformation things, I said the reason why they do it with a multitude of different people is because they know there's a small percentage that are going to make it and do it big, because their bodies just react to it straight away. But the others will do the same thing. They'll look like they changed by 2%. But that's what training does. And that's why having a personal trainer, S&C coach works, because we're there to study the person and what works for them. Because we can't do the same thing for each person, because that's what we do. Otherwise, if it was the same for everyone, we'd be out of the job.
Well, I'd say, let me put an asterisk on that. That's what good personal trainers do.
Exactly. You don't just write down and go, do this, that's it, go. It's no, that does not work. That's why I say to people, it doesn't work for me. I had a friend, I said, could you send me something for training that I've not done? Because I know so much things. I have so much knowledge in this now. I want to see what someone would give me to do and see if it's challenging. And he'd just become a trainer. It was really interesting because he gave me a routine, and it was really good. It was challenging. It was well thought out, but he did it for me specifically because he knew how strong I was in body weight. So he knew press ups and stuff. He knew the sets, but we were talking about it afterwards. I said, now, can you imagine giving this to somebody who just started? Can you imagine? It would be you couldn't, it would be impossible. But I said, the great thing about progressive in sports is that you're developing someone to get better. But then there's a point of where you go, if you're not seeing any changes, because that can happen to me, I can get fitter and fitter, but I know it's the food. It's always the food with me.
Well, and again, to your point, maybe you could push your training a little harder here, a little part there, but it's a diminishing return, right? Like you either run out of time physically,
Yeah.
like run out of time, like you have other things to do, or you just run out of like motivation. Like you don't feel like riding your bicycle, like 40 kilometers or something, right?
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
maybe you ride it 10, but I don't want to ride it. I just don't want to be on a bike for 2 hours. I just don't want to do it. So
Yeah,
then the food does become more important.
yeah,
And I think, in a perfect world, you have this kind of if you can figure it out, you kind of have like, like concentric circles, right? So your core circle is like, okay, your health and like, what do you like to do? Like for me, I like to lift, right? I don't like
yeah.
to run and I don't like to do, and
You've
I'm
always been a
heavier
lifter.
too.
From since I've known you, you're a lifting
Yeah.
dude. Like,
And I'm like, and again, to be fair, like, gosh, let me see kilograms. I'm like 120 kilograms, something like that, right? So
yeah,
it's hard for me to jog because my knees just don't love. I'm a
yeah.
bigger guy,
It's
right?
uncomfortable straight away.
Yeah. And so I like to lift. So like that's my concentric circle. And then like a circle out of that is like, okay, knowing that if I'm going to be more lifting based, then I have to kind of do cardio within my lifts, which is what I do now, right? So like
Yeah,
I might superset a lift with some sort of like plyo jumps or high knees or a
yeah,
lot of the body weight stuff.
yeah,
And then like a circle out from that is like food. And like to me, if you can kind of figure out your circles and like what's your core thing that you really enjoy and you can be consistent at it, I think it just makes it easier for your body to stay in a healthy place. When
yeah,
you're always all over the place and you have no center, it's very difficult to make
yeah.
progress.
No, exactly. And going back to obviously in the professional standpoint for coaching and athletes now, like players like Kevin Durant, someone who came off of a horrible Achilles injury, who to be honest to me looks great now. It's
Yeah.
not even, doesn't look like he ever had an injury as far as I'm concerned. And even Clay as well. Clay looked great. You can see that Clay just needs to play more games. Like same thing. But do you believe that with obviously someone like LeBron playing as long as he's played, do you think a lot of these players now to build their legacy are going to start to think maybe I need to play till I'm in my 40s nearly? Because I think to myself, Jacob, like me and you, we've both got families, bro. Like we've both got families. And I'm thinking to myself, how much time do you spend away from your family? And you've got more than enough money, more
Yep.
than enough like investments and things that you can do. Like, what is keeping you in the game? Is it legacy? Do you feel like that's what it is? Is it the legacy part of it, or is it just the competitive nature?
I think you, and again, if we're just generalizing, I think you lose your competitiveness as you get older because other things, like you're saying, become more important to you. Like LeBron last year with the Lakers is a really good example, right? They did make the playoffs. And once it kind of became apparent that they weren't, it's the first time. And again, I'm not judging LeBron. I'm just saying from a distance as a fan of the sport. It's the first time I saw him be like, you know what? Maybe I should rehab this knee. Maybe I should it used to be like, no, I'm playing. I don't care. Like I'm playing. And like, I think he's starting, I think even in his mind, he's saying, you know what? There's some strategy and benefit to me really, really getting my body right so that next year we can be better. And he wants to play with his son, allegedly, right? Like they want to have 1 year together in the day. Like,
Yeah,
I
which is
think it's
great.
not about, yeah, I mean, but here's the thing. If that's your goal, then it's not necessarily about competitiveness anymore. Right. Because now your goal is legacy, not just with your basketball, but with your family. And like, I think as you get older, your perspective has to change. It has to.
It has
and
to.
so like, I don't think there's like a snap tipping point where it just shifts. I think it's this kind of progression. Like when you're younger, you want to prove yourself and, all this and like kind of F everybody kind of attitude. Right.
Yeah.
And then like, as you get older, it's more about like, man, like I want to have a good legacy. I want to have my family in a good place. And I think most of the guys who play that long, it's either legacy driven or it's like they love the game that much. Like Jamal Crawford, right?
Yeah.
Jamal Crawford like finally retired like last year.
I know. I didn't think he was ever going to retire, if I'm honest. Like he just seemed like that kind of player that was going to, he didn't age. His body was the same. It never changed. His mechanics, everything that he did looked the same as when he was in his prime. So I guess he retired because it was time.
Well, he just retired because people decided it was his time, right? Like he could not get a deal. And again, I don't think for him it was legacy. Like no one's going to look back on Jamal Crawford in 20 years and say he's one of the greatest players of all time, right? But for Jamal Crawford, he truly loves the game. Like he loves it. He lives it. He breathes it. And he's like, if I can keep in this game, I'm going to do it.
He's going to do it.
You get a few guys like Lou, who I think probably could have played a couple more years.
I thought so.
If he wanted to take that, it would have been that role though, where he's kind of bouncing around team to team. He's
And
kind
that's
of filling out the
and that's not
bench.
family based. It's not family based, man.
Well, and Lou has so many other things going on, right? Like
Yeah.
with South Sudan and like trying to rebuild
Foundation.
his country and like, yeah, his foundation. Like there's so much that's going on for him that I think that his legacy in his
Yes.
mind
It's bigger than
wasn't
basketball.
about basketball.
Yeah, it's bigger than basketball. And that's what we're talking about. Like, when does it become about basketball? And when does it become about the thing, humanity? When does it become about life?
Right.
And his journey into the league is obviously completely different than a
Yeah.
LeBron journey or a Kevin journey. And for them to even look at what he's done, I always say they could never really relate to the situation because it's so unique to him. But even now, seeing what he's done, he's developing young men and athletes and young women that are going to do something beyond basketball as well, because they've seen basketball is just an avenue that can get you to somewhere to help you with your dreams progress even further. And that's what I love about the whole story.
Yeah, you know, I think again, if you I'm kind of on that concentric circle analogy, right? Like for Luol, like basketball was for sure his center, but because of that, he gets access to all these other things. And so, like the foundation in South Sudan, you know, they have the Mandu Bowl Court where they train 400 or 500 kids a week for free in basketball, girls and boys. They have the first women's league ever in the country that just started.
Wow.
But because those kids show up to that on a consistent basis and they're well taken care of and trained and they have nice uniforms and like we really work hard to get them shoes and basketballs and all these other things, you know, when they do an academic program or a healthcare program or all these other things that aren't basketball, the kids show up for it because they feel cared for and they feel connected, right?
Yeah.
That becomes their community center. And that's the goal of a community center, right? Is you bring people together and you create a community out of sport. And so like Luol has used basketball as a platform and as a way to like connect with the larger community to really do some good work for humanity. And it's a really cool thing to see. There's a lot more work to be done, but it's cool to see the momentum shifting and I think progress really being made.
Well, what's great about your relationship with Luol, not only just being his coach, now you're business partners as well. And you've ventured together and you're now like part of his philanthropy team of actually building the country back up. Now, how does it feel for you, obviously, now being a part of his family? Because I always say your family now, like it's not even work anymore. It's family. So when you're seeing all the changes since you went to Sudan the first time, how unbelievable has that been, seeing how it's progressed?
Well, you know, in terms of like family with Lou, like I would say 100% he's my brother. You know, when I do go to London, like I stay at his house. You know what I mean? I feel very, very welcomed always by his family, and I love Lou and his family. I love them so much. You know, I've actually never been to South Sudan. Because if you know if you know the philanthropy side of Luol, I don't think he returned until, was it 2014? Was his first time back?
It was late, yeah.
Well, because the country wasn't stable, right? They got their independence.
The reason why they left, you couldn't go back, yeah, exactly.
You couldn't go safely. Yeah. And then even 2014, when he went back, he didn't go back again until I think 2018 because they didn't broker a peace agreement within themselves. So they fought Sudan, right? Civil war. Then they got their independence. Then they started fighting within themselves. And so that they didn't broker that peace agreement until I think 2018. And I think that's when Luol returned the second time. So Luol, like in the last couple of years, his ability to go to South Sudan has increased dramatically. And he's there frequently. But I was never able to go with him because when I used to travel with him all the time when we were training, we just didn't go. It wasn't necessarily safe to do so. Now that's changed quite a bit the last 2 years. And, you know, the national team was just there. They met the president, you know, thousands of people were in the streets celebrating the national team because we're one win away from qualifying for the World Cup. It was incredible. And I could have gone on that, but I was already in Senegal before that trip. Then I was in Tunisia. It's like, I need to go home, man. I got a wife and kids. Like,
that's what we were just talking about. Sometimes you get to a point where like, it's like you got to find the balance, and that's the life balance.
Well, and the thing about Luol's life is he's such an international, you know, person, just in terms of how he lives and how he works. You know, I could technically travel with Luol year round and never be home. I could just be with him. So like a long time ago, I had to decide like, okay, like if I don't have to be there, I should probably go home. Right. Because it's really easy to fall into this thing where it's like, I'm kind of constantly traveling. And, you know, I always tell people like, I like my wife. It's why I married her. Like, I like my kids. That's why I had them. Like, I want to be around them, you know? And so, and look, there's going to be plenty of chance for me to go to South Sudan, but To better answer your question in terms of the country, the national team, which Luol is president of, and he's the guy who's funded it. He's a guy who's brought it up. It's changed the country. They're painting murals on the sides of buildings now of the national team. Like I said, when they just returned home, thousands of people. They said there hasn't been a celebration like that in Juba, which is the capital, since they got their independence. That's the largest celebration since their independence. We haven't even made the World Cup. We're one win away, right? Which is awesome. Away. I mean, we're one of the best teams in Africa. It's really cool, but we haven't even actually done it yet. And people are like, this is the greatest thing of all time. Because in a country like South Sudan that's been through so much, there's not always necessarily a lot of like national hope. Yeah. And there's not a lot of things nationally, I think, to provide unity necessarily. Yeah. And sport provides that. And they have a national soccer team, but it's very difficult, I think, to break into soccer at like a high level. Like it's such a well-developed sport. Yeah. But basketball, Luol has expertise in, and he's brought other people in with expertise.
Grassroots.
And South Sudan has just a lot of gifted. We were talking about earlier, like the Heights, like they have a lot of gifted athletes.
Yeah, straight away, it's like you've got, okay, this guy can dunk and he can't play yet. That's what you're getting, guys that can dunk before they can lay up. And
we were just in Tunisia, right? And we brought this kid who's 15. He's at the NBA Academy right now. He's 7'2" at 15. He's 15. But he from here down, he looks like a grown man. He's like, in kilos, he's like 105 kilograms. Like he's not skinny 7'2".
Wow.
Like he can windmill dunk at 7'2" already. He's not awkward. Like that's just natural. It's just
he's got his natural coordination already there. So you already know, like NBA guys already know. They're like, yeah, we scouted him. He's already been scouted.
Yeah.
They're following him literally now. As long as he doesn't get injured, they're keeping him. That's literally what it is.
Yeah. So Luol taking the time to like spend the money, invest in the infrastructure, and then create an environment where these guys can come together and play. You've seen the success that the team is having, and hopefully the success we get to have. But the point is like he's not doing it for that because it's all nonprofit. He's doing it because it elevates his country. Exactly. He's doing it because of what just happened when they returned home, and thousands of people who maybe a few years ago were at war with each other are celebrating in the streets together. Exactly. It's the South Sudan national team. Right. It's not this tribe's national team or this. It's the South. It's a whole country's team. And they call them the Bright Stars, which I think is an incredible name because it just shows you like the youth of the country and like how literally like this is their kind of moment as the stars kind of shining bright. And, you could not have scripted it. I don't think if you would have sat down with Lou 5 years ago and said, this is my plan step by step, this is how it's going to happen. I think it's more about you have to go and do the work, and you do the work with the right intentions and the right passion and the right people, and the right things happen.
Exactly. And you know what, guys, I have to always cut these things short because I know me and you can talk all day long, but I just want to say thank you so much for coming. I appreciate it. But this is the part one. We're going to have a part two because we need to do it because like we said, this isn't just about basketball. This is bigger than basketball. This is Marv Basketball. Thanks so much for coming on, Jacob, and hope to see you soon, bro.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.